Hello and welcome. This is the first video in our Summer of Aviation with Sophie Line series. I'm Sophie Line and I'm here at the amazing Pima Air and Space Museum in sunny Tucson, Arizona. And the first thing that you notice right off of Highway 10 is this incredible collection of aircraft outdoors. It's one of the biggest collections that I've ever been to. They have almost 500 aircraft here. And I came originally as a visitor. And they have a list online of all the different planes and stuff in the collection. And one in particular caught my eye and made me say, I have to go, we have to go. And I ended up spending 2 days here with the man critter going over everything. This particular aircraft is so ugly that it kind of loops back around again, and it's a bit endearing. So the Fairey Gannet has charmed me, and it's going to be our first video in the series. And I hope it inspires you to come and see it for real. There aren't very many of them here in the US, and I have the director of the museum, Mr. Scott Marchand, to do a little talk on it. So I'll turn the camera over to him, and we'll see what we can learn about this ungainly buddy.
Hi everybody, my name's Scott. I'm the museum director out here, and we're really delighted to be collaborating with Sophie on this series of videos covering her interests and ours in the next several months. So hope at some point you might be all motivated to come for a visit and get a little more in-depth on what we're going to walk and talk about today. So the first airplane we're going to talk about in this series is right behind me. It's the Fairey Gannet, which is a very notable Cold Warrior, but kind of an unsung aircraft. It's quite special to our collection. It's been here since 2002, and I started just a little bit before its arrival here. And this is actually the first aircraft I was involved in acquiring and disassembling and transporting for the museum, so it's kind of special for me. This particular airplane is an AEW version, Airborne Early Warning, rather than just the straight ASW, Anti-Submarine Warfare variant. There were 44 of these built as a distinct production block and not as a modified airplane. There were 303 ASW variants built over the course of its production. But the Gannet is an unusual airplane. Now, the British, I don't know what goes on in their heads sometimes engineering-wise, because they can build some of those beautiful airplanes like the Spitfire, and then you have things like the Gannet, which honestly are so ungainly it's hard not to be affectionate about it. But what's I think, I don't know for a fact, but I'm going to guess they probably, if you've ever seen a Gannet seabird walking around, they're really awkward, they do goofy things with their wings, and so does this thing, right? So its wings have a trifold, so when it's on the carrier deck for storage, instead of sort of the conventional sort of A-frame type of fold up, it kind of folds up in like this, so the tip drops down. So it kind of looks like an ungainly seabird when it's on the ground, but Gannets when they're in the air and out fishing are supreme predators. So there's a lot to what's in a name for lots of airplanes. So the Gannet is a rarity in North America and doesn't get a lot of attention with our audience here. In fact, this is the only Gannet that's on display in North America. The Gannet was operated by the Fleet Air Arm and the Royal Navy on all of their carrier aircraft from its introduction to service in 1953 to full retirement in 1978. The German Navy, the Indonesian Navy, and the Australian navies also operated Gannets during the Cold War, and they all had terrific experiences with the aircraft. One thing that was really sort of important about the Gannet from safety and performance on the carriers is the power plants in the Gannet, the double Mamba engines. They were multi-fuel engines, so it could run on dirty fuel, diesel, kerosene, lightweight spirits, which from a safety standpoint on a carrier is notable, right? Because this meant that the Royal Navy was able to eliminate all sort of conventional aromatic fuels from their carriers, which reduced the risk of fire and explosion in the event of an accident. So the Gannet had a lot of really unique features for its time. On the ASW variants, it was the first Royal Navy aircraft, carrier-based strike aircraft, to incorporate all of its stores internally. It could also carry external rocket pods, fuel pylons, and contain a variety of sonobuoys, depth charges, rockets, bombs in an internal weapons stores bay, which gave it better performance, longer range, cleaner looks, and just safer operation for the crews. Now, the one thing that really stands out about the Gannet as a feature, setting aside its high posture, is the twin aircraft, the twin propellers up at the front of the aircraft. So this is called a contra-rotating propeller. So what that means is the propellers are being driven from a central gearbox and drive shaft, but they rotate in opposite directions. And what that does is it counteracts torque. It focuses your thrust more cleanly. So it's interesting, it's technically a twin engine aircraft, right? It's got one propeller up front, but each of these propellers is driven by an individual engine on board the aircraft. So what that meant is when the aircraft was at cruise, they could shut down one engine and one propeller and conserve energy and still effectively perform their mission. When they needed the power to get reintroduced, whether it was for an attack or for landing, they could activate the other engine, kick both propellers in, and have that extra margin of safety. This particular version is one of the 44 AEW airborne early warning aircraft built. So it's got a different configuration from the ASW Gannets. So the ASW Gannets had a crew of 3, but they were all sitting in individual cockpits along the back spine of the aircraft. Whereas in this version, you have the pilot up front, in the cockpit area here, sitting over top of the engines just behind the propeller gearboxes, and in the back were the 2 other crew members, so basically the electronics operators. So they were in a cramped little hellhole in the back, so they really didn't have a lot of perspective of outside. So, you know, to crew on these things, you had to have a pretty iron stomach and be immune to seasickness, because you're getting pitched around and thrown around. And I personally cannot handle that, so I don't know how these guys did. So the other key element of the EW version is this giant radome underneath the airplane, right? So several British aircraft, including the Shackleton, used the same sea search radar, and these were moved over from the Fleet Air Arm Sky Raider fleet. So there were quite a few Sky Raiders in service with the Fleet Air Arm, but they were all retired again in the movement to eliminate volatile fuels from the flight decks. But the radars were top of the line and superb for the era, so they were incorporated into the design for the Gannet heading forward. So like with all aircraft, and certainly in the era when this is being designed and produced, there were a lot of lessons learned from World War II that are all incorporative, you know, from carry operations to sea search operations to anti-submarine attack tactics that were developed during the war. And you see a lot of these elements and lessons learned rolled up into this airframe. Carriers, even now, and more so from World War II and in the Cold War, were very cramped operational environments, and the economy that was squeezed out of them was remarkable, right? So you wouldn't think there would be dozens and dozens of airplanes operating off such a small space. So most carrier aircraft are designed to occupy as little space as possible in the hangar deck or on the operational deck until they're needed to go into service. So, and again, it's no different, which is why you have the multifold wing. The fuselage itself is very narrow and tall. That's also to help take up less space in the hangar deck and in the flight deck. And you can see it's quite it's a very tall airplane. I mean, the cockpit's probably sitting about 10 or 11 feet off the ground from us here. And honestly, operationally, it would probably be about 1.5 feet taller. Our struts are degassed, so they're flat. So the main gear struts, you'd probably be seeing down in this area here, probably chrome on the oleo, probably to roughly the height of the main wheel tire, and the same thing in the nose. The crew access, you can see here, is through a series of steps. So there'd be a little ladder here, and they had a gymnastic sequence of climbing up into the cockpit. You know, occupational health and safety wasn't always as a high a level of concern in design in the 1940s as it's become now. So everything about the airplane is economy and performance and fit for purpose. The development of the jet turbine engines and the Mambas in particular were quite revolutionary for the time. You got to remember, it's 1949, with the jet age had really only come to pass in 1943-44 when the Messerschmitt 262s came into service, and the rapid advancements and the studies of that technology that led to these turbine engines was pretty consequential for aircraft moving forward. The the combination of the double Mambas here produces just a smidge under 4,000 horsepower, so 3,875 horsepower, which is an awful lot when you consider the highest performance World War II piston engine fighters were well under half of that capacity, right? So, you know, the Thunderbolts, the Corsairs, that type of thing, they were running in the sort of 2,200 horsepower range at full power. So, you know, the Mamba one, or the Gannet, when it was relaxed, was cruising at half that power. Below here is basically your exhaust port for the engines. Nothing fancy about those, but they're usually ducted to prevent interference with the pilot, field of vision. You know, a noticeable thing about the cockpit here is it was designed specifically to give the pilot and air crew a really good commanding view of the flight deck upon launching and for landing. It's really high, it's really clear, you've got a great field of view, you can see everything that's going on below you, to the left and the right, in front of you, which is really critical for safety when you have deck crews hooking up the aircraft for launch, marshalling aircraft on deck, both up and down into the hangar, recovering aircraft. It lets you get the aircraft cleared from the recovery area and down into the hangar area as fast as possible. So there's a lot of things that we take sort of for granted or seen as standard things in carrier operations, but these were all innovations at that time, and this is one of the early innovators. So this airplane, after it retired from fleet service with the Royal Navy, they were all sold as surplus in 1978. This airplane was bought by a company in San Antonio, Texas, brought over to North America. It was acquired by Hamilton Standard Propeller Company up in the Connecticut area, and was used for some flight development testing by them for several years. It was donated to the New England Air and Space Museum. It was there for a couple years. They suffered tremendous damage in a tornado around that era, and for a variety of reasons, they ended up selling and trading off this airplane to a private individual in California, and we acquired it from him. So it's still in its Royal Navy markings as released from service, which means it hasn't seen paint since probably 1972. So it's on our list of things to do. One thing I will point out about our operation here is a lot of our aircraft are on loan from other government programs, and we have an obligation to care and maintain those aircraft, so they tend to take a higher precedence than the aircraft that the museum owns directly. So what you see here is the consequence of that. Our poor old Gannet probably suffering in the sun a little longer than maybe it deserves because we own it, and it's going to suffer a little more benign neglect than the loan partners that we have an obligation to care for. And you know, we couldn't do it without our partners. So yeah, so hopefully in the near future the Gannet will get a load of attention, but you can see it's still wearing its markings from its last Royal Navy fleet deployment with Heron Flight 78 at I think RNAS Culdrose was where it finished its life. It served on all the major carriers, the Hermes and the Ark Royal during the Cold War, was with several different squadron assignments, and at the end of the day, there aren't that many survivors of the poor old Gannet, maybe a half a dozen or 10. There's a couple in Australia, a couple in Europe. I think there's one or two in Indonesia, and there's this one in North America. So, you know, out of 350 odd aircraft, you know, you need this many fingers to count how many survive. And that's often a true tale of a lot of aircraft and airframes. It's, you need a lot of terrain, you need a lot of space, and you often need a good highway or a runway to save and preserve aircraft, and that's a unique recipe to combine. The crew access for this aircraft is on the left-hand side, and this is an emergency escape hatch for the crew, and it's also a scanner's window. So you see this big blister bubble that allows the crew member to stick their head out into that window space and look below and behind. You know, a lot of times you trust your instruments, but every now and then you have to stick your head out and look around and verify that what your instruments are telling you is actually true. The Gannet sort of has a hybridized tri-tail. Like, you don't often see a triple tail on aircraft. They're either single tail or a twin tail. I mean, the Constellations are most famous for their tri-tails, and the Mohawks are also notable for that too. And this is more of a hybrid. So these strakes on the horizontal were incorporated to give a lot more lateral stability to the aircraft. So you have a lot of power coming out. You're trying to conserve space on the deck, so the horizontal is probably shorter than it probably would be on a land-based aircraft for this configuration and power output. So putting these strakes on the tail surface allowed a lot more lateral stability without having to take up additional area outside the footprint of the airplane. Well, so a lot of our aircraft here come from either across the street at the 309th A Mark, the quote-unquote boneyard. We're fortunate to have a gate with the base and a tow path across the road. A lot of aircraft come over that way. But we also fly in aircraft occasionally. But a lot of them that we do end up moving that haven't flown in or been towed across, they get dismantled and put on trucks and brought cross-country and often cases from overseas. So the Gannet up in Connecticut hadn't been, taken apart since it was built. And what goes into that is, we need to get access to technical materials, and I was new to the job, and there were people that knew what they were doing, and so we had some help with some third-party contractors, and I learned a lot from them. And basically, what happened with the Gannet is you kind of look at it going this way, but it's built this way, right? So what you need to do, so to get something moving over the road, there's geometry, right? So depending on where you're coming from, there's restrictions on width and height. Weight typically isn't that big a problem with respect to moving aircraft. It can be with tanks and other vehicles. The biggest challenge with aircraft is really their volume that they occupy. So what you need to do is you have to take apart the control surfaces, you take the horizontal out, you take the vertical stabilizer off. A lot of times outer wing panels come off, and in this case with the Gannet, being able to fold the wings up into configuration, the airplane came apart. You can see this hatch right up here, just forward of this hatch here, there's a production joint. So there's a big heavy-duty bulkhead, so when you unbolt it there, the entire back end of the airplane comes out, and you have to disconnect electrical lines, control runs, fuel lines, there's all sorts of stuff going on inside an airplane. It's like your nervous system, your muscles, your tendons, your tissues, it's all there in the airplane too. So you have to disconnect those or cut them in some cases, drain fluids. And then just ahead of that point, the cockpit also comes off too, which leaves a great big center wing box area. So what we did is we folded up the wings into its stowed configuration, turned it laterally onto the truck deck, set it in a double drop, and it fit within allowable tolerances, needed a few oversized permits for some jurisdictions. And then the remaining parts, the propellers were taken off, everything else stowed very nicely onto standard flatbed load. Took a couple days to truck it across the country, I'm sorry. And when it was back here, it's the reverse process of reassembly. And that took about 2 weeks of work, because often what you find too, especially with naval aircraft, is they suffer a lot of corrosion that you don't see until you're trying to take an airplane apart. You got bolts that fall apart, or they come out and they're not going back in. So there's a lot of replacement hardware in here. It's also a good opportunity to deal with potential corrosion issues. Even though we're in the desert and we're a very low corrosive environment, paint and rubber suffer the worst. Airplanes still suffer from their previous experience, right? So naval aircraft in particular, even if you can't see the rot, they've often got hidden rot. So anytime there's an opportunity to get a little bit deeper inside a Navy airplane, we take advantage of that and inspect and do corrosion control and correction as we're able to. The British spent a lot of time looking at developing contra-rotating propellers. There are multiple things. They're hoping to get more thrust out of the same surface area, capture more power and energy from the engines, and also reduce torque and sort of lateral pull. So when you have, 1, 2, 3, or 4 engines pulling a certain way, you kind of have a little that wants to creep in the direction, like a gyroscope, right? So if you have a contra-rotating propeller, it zeroes out that sway tendency. Same principle with the twin rotor assembly aircraft like a Chinook or a Sea Knight, right? You have the main rotors rotating opposite to each other. That counteracts the torque that is typically balanced out in a regular helicopter by the tail rotor. But in the case of the Gannet, you have the Mamba engines side by side going into a centralized gearbox, and through a series of complicated gears and ellipticals and reduction gears, it went into 2 output shafts that went into the gearbox up behind the propellers. So each engine was independently powering the propellers. So when the crew elected to, they were able to shut off one of the engines and fly on a single propeller, which cut your gas consumption in half and permitted a much longer flight envelope. So that was also, a really important innovation with this airplane was, range and performance extension without needing to add power plants or fuel carrying capacity.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Mr. Marchand is a walking plane encyclopedia, so to speak, and so it's amazing to have some of his time on the channel. Keep up with the rest of the videos from this summer, and if you could help me out, there are so many aircraft here that it's kind of hard to choose which ones to cover. I, of course, have my own list, but if you would take a look at the link to the collection in the description, and take a look through everything and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see a closer look at. A lot of these are also beautifully restored on the inside, and so the internals of some of these aircraft are also available. So let me know what you want to see, and I will see what I can add to my list for the short summertime that I have to work on it. We'll see what I can add to my list. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, throw a like and a follow, and we'll see some more aircraft and some more tanks, of course, throughout the summer. My usual tank content and stuff will persist. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you next time.